How far would you go for money? We all have our price, that's for sure, so where's your limit? Let's say a cool $1,000,000. Well, back in the 1930s, Jean Harlow was pulling in exactly that amount. But what did she have to do to rake in the dough? Well, pretty much everything. In just a decade, she graced the silver screen in 36 films, leaving an indelible mark on Hollywood. She was one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood during the 1930s. Jean typically earned between $25,000 and $50,000 per film. In today's rates, that would be equal to over $1 million per film. I'm not telling you anything new when I say that money ruled the roost in the olden days, just like it does today. Some things never change, right? Money was the driving force behind everything in Hollywood. It called the shots on which films got made, all with one goal, the big blockbuster and the even bigger payday. So studios were ready to pull out all the stops. And when I say all, I mean all. They pushed the limits, bent the rules, all in the name of one thing: money. Their secret weapons? Well, the actors and actresses, of course. They were the studio's puppets, dancing on their strings, caring about nothing except their own interests. Money, folks, it's something we all crave, whether we want to admit it or not. In the golden era, you had actresses who were absolutely money-minded. In this video, I'm delving into Jean Harlow's world, exploring just how money-hungry she was. As a bonus, I'll reveal her ultimate money-making goals, but that's not all. I'm also taking you deep into the lengths she was willing to go to satisfy her financial desires. I've saved the best for last, so I highly recommend sticking around until the end of the video. What I can guarantee you is that this seemingly innocent beauty, an idol of the silver screen, will completely change in your eyes. You will see her in a whole new light. In the 1930s, Jean Harlow was the reigning queen of Hollywood. With her sultry beauty, effortless charm, and innate sensuality, she earned the moniker the Blonde Bombshell. Harlow embodied the archetype of Hollywood's original grabby women, igniting the silver screen in a string of lavish MGM films. It's not unusual for someone to become crazy about the money when they've never had it before. Those who grew up in poverty often didn't have the chance to learn how to manage it responsibly, because it was rare in their families. Jean Harlow had humble beginnings. Her father came from a working-class background and worked as a dentist, while her mother, Jean, was raised as the privileged daughter of a real estate broker. At a young age, Harlow made some big sacrifices and choices to secure a better future. She skipped much of her teenage years and eloped at just 16 with a wealthy stockbroker. This decision opened the doors to Los Angeles, where she launched her professional acting career. Quite a feat for a 16-year-old, isn't it? When I was 16, I barely knew where I was headed in life. Her beauty wasn't just skin deep. She had the acting chops to match. Studio execs noticed her striking looks, but Jean Harlow quickly proved she was more than just a pretty face. As her career began to sizzle in Tinseltown, her marriage was on the rocks. After just 2 years, she and McGrew called it quits. He couldn't handle his wife's rising stardom. She became a comedic sensation, pioneering the image of the stunning, funny blonde. As biographer Darrell Rooney put it, she definitely created the mould for that spectacular-looking blonde who was sexy and humorous. Her on-screen charm was backed by a genuine childlike quality. This image wasn't a facade. Jean Harlow was genuinely naive and innocent. She was lured in by the early promise of money, manipulated by her money-driven family. Harlow got the nickname The Baby from her family, and it stuck around at the studio too. She once admitted that she didn't even know her real name, Harleen, until she started school. Strangely, the nickname suited her perfectly. She had this cherubic baby face, complete with Cupid doll lips, painted a deep red. She could play the femme fatale, but there was always this underlying childlike quality that made her stand out from her fellow actresses. The audiences always loved her. Harlow once said, "I don't want to play hard-boiled girls. It's so different from the real me." But there's more to Jean Harlow than her Hollywood image. She stood out from many A-list stars of her era because of her upbeat personality and lack of diva behaviour. That heart of gold she played on the screen was very real. When you watch Jean's early films, remember her background. She was a young, inexperienced girl suddenly thrust into Hollywood's unforgiving spotlight. Critics were harsh, and she faced tremendous pressure to succeed, all while supporting her manipulative mother and her flamboyant stepfather, Marino Bello. Her big break came when Howard Hughes cast her as the lead in his Hollywood debut, Hell's Angels. Her unpolished, raw appeal and iconic line, "Would you be shocked if I slipped into something more comfortable?" have become iconic. Yet her journey to stardom was marked by her fame-hungry mother's control. She even convinced her to change her name from Harleen Carpenter to the more Hollywood-friendly Jean Harlow. She was determined to achieve fame through her daughter. And it worked. Jean's career took off. She appeared in Red Dust, where she became famous for a scene where she bathed in a rain barrel while Clark Gable played with her hair. It shocked some moral critics. It also rattled her husband at the time. Imagine the atmosphere back then, when her husband died during the film's production, and some suspected Jean of being involved in his death. She had only been married to Paul Byrne, who was 22 years her senior, for a few weeks, when he apparently shot himself in the head. He left behind a last note that she claimed not to understand. In the note he had written, "Dearest dear, unfortunately this is the only way to make right the terrible wrong I have done you, and to erase my deep humiliation." Many believe that Paul took his own life because he couldn't bear the humiliation of what Harlow symbolized as a woman during that era. That scene with Clark Gable caused quite a stir back then. Women were expected to conform to strict conservative norms at the time, and Jean Harlow's playful portrayal went against the grain. But others argue that Paul's death was triggered by getting caught after a night out, unable to cope with the resulting stigma. He had spent the night with another man. The scandal threatened to torpedo Harlow's career, but he clammed up, fading into obscurity. It was quite the feat for those so-called Hollywood fixers to handle, their top priority, safeguarding Jean Harlow's image. Because once Hollywood snagged its new star, the bigwigs in the studios got to thinking about how to mould Jean Harlow's glamorous image. And Harlow's success soared, raking in a fortune for the studio that knew no bounds. She became their top priority, and they micromanaged every aspect of her life, from her interactions to her diet. Nothing was left to chance, all to ensure she remained a public favourite. Even that iconic platinum blonde hair colour, it was a meticulously crafted marketing gimmick. She owed those instantly recognisable locks to none other than Howard Hughes. Back in the 20s and early 30s, while people were dabbling in hair dye, the specific shade of platinum blonde hadn't been achieved yet, so when Hughes realised he had a burgeoning A-lister on his hands, he decided to create Harlow her very own on-screen persona. It wasn't his first time. So, what did they come up with? They were tossing around ideas like Blonde Landslide and Darling Cyclone. Eventually they settled on Platinum Blonde. Hughes decided to reward a hairdresser with $10,000 for getting the perfect blonde shade. Harlow's hair stylist, Alfred Pagano, revealed that he had used peroxide, ammonia, Clorox and Lux Flakes every week to maintain that look. Of course, this beauty regime was extremely harsh, and Harlow's hair started falling out towards the end of her life. But despite the risks, this didn't deter women from wanting to replicate her look. Her popularity soared, so did peroxide sales across America. She solidified herself as Hollywood's hottest woman. She became Hollywood's ultimate sensation, setting the standard for stunning blondes who effortlessly blended sex appeal with humour. Moreover, Jean Harlow wasn't your typical dumb blonde. She was willing to go to great lengths for one simple reason: money. She knew that to maintain the extravagant lifestyle that came with being the highest-earning actress in Hollywood, she needed large amounts of wealth. And she absolutely adored the finer things in life, from lavish parties to expensive jewellery and all the trappings of luxury. Harlow's opulent lifestyle became the epitome of fashion, and many women of the era aspired to emulate it. She was a glamorous trendsetter and a fashion icon. Her home in Beverly Hills was adorned with lavish furnishings and exquisite artwork, and her extensive collection of jewellery and other luxurious items were the talk of the town. Harlow was a frequent patron of upscale restaurants and often rubbed shoulders with other Hollywood stars. Also, to her love for the high life, Harlow had quite the sweet tooth for chocolate and couldn't resist indulging in this luxurious treat. Jean Harlow knew she was adored. She also knew that to stay in the spotlight she had to play the game a bit differently. She didn't mind getting a bit spicy, even sharing her most intimate secrets with the press. This is how it became widely known that Harlow slept in the buff and never bothered with panties or any kind of underwear. You can imagine how this titillated her male fans, fueling their fantasies, and women, they too couldn't resist a juicy scandal or rumour about her. Some wanted to emulate her boldness, while others criticised her actions as cheap. Insecurities about her acting haunted her during the filming of Hell's Angels, leading to a poignant exchange between her and director James Whale. "Tell me exactly what you want," Harlow implored Whale, "and I'll do it." In exasperation he retorted, "I can tell you how to be an actress, yes, but I can't show you how to be a woman." And that's precisely what made Jean Harlow the real deal. She embodied the essence of a genuine woman through and through. The folks on her film crews absolutely adored her. They fondly recalled her as a kind, down-to-earth soul, and boy, could she roll those dice like nobody's business. In those days, before the glittering allure of Las Vegas, she had her own special hideaway, Agua Caliente, a swanky gambling resort down in Tijuana that's still around today. But beyond her glitzy facade, Harlow had a heart of pure gold. She was renowned for stepping up and helping out crew members who found themselves in financial binds. Meanwhile, her mother and stepfather continued to take advantage of Harlow, treating her more like a meal ticket than their own flesh and blood. Harlow and her mother had this really close, almost eerie connection. Mama Jean, as everyone called her, was over the top with how much she spoiled and protected her precious daughter. But when Harlow hit the big time, Mama Jean cranked it up a notch. She once yelled out, talking about Harlow's fans and her newfound stardom, "She was always mine, all mine." While Jean embodied a new generation of young women, she grappled with an age-old dilemma, an overbearing stage mother. Mama Jean channeled her own unfulfilled ambitions into her daughter, unwittingly obstructing Jean's path to happiness during her tragically short life. Jean had an intense love for her mother and would go to great lengths for her, but ultimately trying to be an adult under these circumstances isn't healthy. Young Jean set aside her own aspirations of becoming a writer to fulfill her mother's Hollywood dreams. Jean's primary criteria in a partner seemed to be finding someone who could protect her from her mother's dominance. It was a constant battle between her husband and her mother, with her mother consistently emerging victorious. In 1934, Jean crossed paths with actor William Powell, who interestingly had been previously married to actress Carole Lombard. He was exactly the kind of man she was attracted to, sophisticated and worldly. Despite his love for Jean, William was hesitant to marry her. His previous marriage to an actress had ended in divorce, which made him wary of marrying another actress. Furthermore, he had concerns about Mama Jean's influence over Jean's life. William even went as far as investigating Mama Jean and her husband for any signs of financial misconduct. But Mama Jean always won. As 1937 rolled in, it seemed like Jean was finally going to get her well-deserved happily ever after. She was loaded with cash, famous, and deeply in love with William Powell. Plus, she was adored by fans and her colleagues in the industry. Just when you thought Harlow's life was finally on the right track, something unimaginable happened. Her last 2 years were marked by immense suffering. In 1933 she underwent an emergency appendectomy. After that she moved in with her mother, who was determined to tackle her daughter's escalating battle with alcoholism. But it's important to note that Mother Jean's motivations weren't exactly selfless. Again, Harlow had gained some weight during this time, and her mother believed this threatened her daughter's Hollywood career and the money flow. So she subjected her to a harsh diet, which only worsened Harlow's already frail condition. The once vibrant actress now had a tired, swollen face, a bloated stomach, and thinning hair. Yet Harlow's torment wasn't just physical. She endured a traumatic dental procedure to remove 4 wisdom teeth, during which her heart briefly stopped. She developed an infection from the dental surgery. Hospitalized once again, her co-star Clark Gable later described visiting her as akin to kissing a dead person, a rotting person. And then tragedy struck. Harlow collapsed in her leading man's arms while filming Saratoga. On June 7th, Jean fell into a coma and passed away, stunning the nation and leaving Powell devastated. What led to this tragic event? Her death certificate cites 3 factors: acute respiratory infection, acute nephritis, and uremia. Nothing could have saved Jean Harlow. She was only 26 years old. And what's even sadder is that even if there had been some form of treatment available, it's doubtful Jean would have found the strength to fight it. Her doctor later revealed that Jean didn't want to be saved. She had absolutely no will to live. Blaming her lack of spirit on her failed romance with William Powell would be too simplistic. At 26, she'd already weathered a life filled with failed love affairs. It's more likely her lack of will came from never truly living for herself. When your personal identity is crafted by a machine, when your life is dictated by someone else's desperate pursuit of their dreams through you, when your childhood dreams of love and a family have been crushed by disastrous relationships, it's not hard to understand her lack of motivation. Even her name wasn't her own. Jean Harlow's death didn't just shock the world, it sent shockwaves through the entire Hollywood industry. Mickey Rooney described the impact, recounting how the crew was left stunned. "We weren't just workers on her set," one crew member said. "We were like family to her. If you were unwell, she was the first to notice, the first to send flowers. When a studio executive tried to cut coffee breaks for the crew, Harlow marched into the office and delivered an ultimatum: either they get a coffee break or I don't work." The MGM crew adored Jean Harlow, and her passing brought production to a standstill at MGM. They couldn't work. A heavy silence enveloped the MGM lot and all of Hollywood. It took years for William Powell to recover from Jean's death. Tragically, Powell himself fell ill with cancer the same year Jean died. Without her baby, Mama Jean gradually succumbed to complete dementia. Upon hearing the news, MGM workers abandoned their sets, unable to continue their work. Her state of mind at the time of her death was so tormented that she likely wouldn't have believed the outpouring of sorrow and mourning. Yet Jean's image has endured, and her spirit is immortalized on film. Long after she's gone, that modest dentist's daughter from the Midwest, who never held herself in high regard and who genuinely, in the deepest sense, lived for others, will continue to grace the world, beautiful, youthful, and timeless. It's not easy to pass judgment on Jean Harlow. She wasn't naive. She understood how Hollywood worked and knew how to work it to her advantage. Some might label it as greed, don't you think? It wasn't exactly a hunger for money, though. What's quite clear is how money-driven both the studios and her family were. They wouldn't have hesitated to sacrifice Jean Harlow one by one on the altar of money. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Remember, I promised this video might change how you view Jean Harlow. I hope this has happened. Now click on the following video to find out why were Carole Lombard's scandals kept under wraps. You don't want to miss this one.